The crisis of 1907 was averted. War erupted 7 years later in Europe. To finance the war, Canada introduced the income tax. The USA followed suit a few years later. Post-war prosperity was cut short by the Great Depression.
In that depression, per capita income in Canada declined by 50%. In the province of Saskatchewan, declined by 75%. So this was a devastating depression, particularly hard hit for Canada because we were so dependent on commodities. And price of wheat in 1932 reached its lowest point in 300 years. Very much compounded by the Smoot-Hawley tariff in the United States, put in prohibitive tariff on the import of Canadian agricultural products. It led to a world war, if you like, of beggar thy neighbor.
The Smoot-Hawley tariff caused other countries to raise their tariffs, ultimately exacerbating unemployment.
Turning to banking, there was massive bank failures in the United States and none in Canada. Prime Minister Bennett had been a director of the Royal Bank, and he talked about the principles of banking and that Canadian bankers had paid attention to those principles.
Having larger banks with wide geographical base means that when part of the economy is hurting, that doesn't mean that the bank has to go down as well. You don't have that high failure rate like you do in the US, where we lost thousands of banks during the Great Depression. These banks, mind you, are these tiny unit banks, as they're called. When times go bad, the local banker just has a portfolio of local loans, and they start going south. He's got nowhere to turn for the liquidity that he needs in order to keep the bank going through the rough times, so they end up failing. And then the depositors lose a quarter, a half of their deposits.
When Roosevelt was inaugurated in March of 1933, there were machine gun nests at the corners of the great federal buildings in Washington for the first time since the Civil War. And the unemployment rates conceded that it was between 25 and 33%, and there was no direct relief for them. Nothing. So it was a desperate situation. So Roosevelt shortened the work week, stimulated the economy, and attempted to generate a little bit of inflation. And so he partly demonetized gold, but he set up these vast workfare programs. He was a different type of operator politically to anything we've ever seen in Canada.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected with the hope that he would take a whole new approach to the American economy. Roosevelt introduced the Glass-Steagall Act, which resulted in the separation of commercial and investment banking. In Canada, there was no great innovator, but the government did create a central bank to mitigate the crisis. The outbreak of World War II and the war effort ended the Great Depression. After the war, a new era of prosperity emerged. The U.S. banks continued to compete, thrive, and innovate, while Canadian banks grew as the economy expanded.